Chairman, given the context of the climate change crisis and the huge importance of us as a nation showing leadership, global leadership in recycling, do you think that it's possible for existing waste and recycling infrastructure to realise the recycling rates of 65% or higher? Mr. Jacobs?
To achieve 65%, we have to do a combination of all the things that we've spoken about that are in the strategy. And I think that's achievable by 2035, but certainly no sooner than that. The detail is who's going to pay for it, because there's going to have to be new infrastructure built. As a result of some of the changes, there will be stranded assets which no longer have any value. You know, as I was saying earlier, if you take the food waste out of black bag waste, that will change the dynamics and the treatment that you can afford to do with that material. So it comes down to affordability, but certainly 65%. It is ambitious, but we shouldn't be afraid of that ambition, and we should strive to achieve that.
Okay. Yeah. Mr. Hayler. Yeah.
So I think the first thing to say in terms of climate change is that we've done a fantastic job already as a sector. We've already reduced our emissions from 1990 by 85%, and we were mentioned in the Committee on Climate Change report for having been one of the exemplar sectors in having doing so. Obviously, we want to do even more. That historic stuff has all been on the basis of landfill diversion. We want to be maximising the carbon benefits of our resources and our resource management going forward. Can existing infrastructure meet 65%? Not a prayer. We think in order to meet those future targets, there's going to be roughly £10 billion worth of capital investment that will need to be made in infrastructure. But we think that's a great opportunity. £10 billion of investment, 50,000 jobs. We think the new processing facilities will save around 7 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent per annum. And we think that's a great news story.
All of that funding what should be coming from the government to meet that obligation for additional different recycling infrastructure?
Absolutely not. That is private sector investment. Right. What we're looking for from the government is the long-term investment-grade policy stability that will give the long-term certainty so that the private sector can invest against it. And that's long-term certainty around things like making sure we don't backslide on landfill and making sure that the ambitions to recycle 65% are actually biting.
Okay. And Mr. Courtois, how much funding do you think that the government needs to provide for additional or different recycling infrastructure?
I don't think it's so much necessarily for the government. I think it's for the private sector. And I think, if I can give an example in terms of plastics, it's kind of generally estimated that we're going to need another 5 plastics reprocessing facilities. If the plastics tax comes in, which is the one about 30% recycled content, and that's actually something which is very positive, because it's going to be UK domestic infrastructure, it will be investment by private sector companies, and it would mean that we can start to deliver the recycled content that would be necessary as part of the plastics tax. So it's almost with that, plastics has been a lead area as far as that's concerned, and I think that's a good example of where more investment in new infrastructure will be needed, and it will be needed on a national basis. So it's often going to be, there'll be regional shortages of infrastructure in different parts of the country, and that's where the gaps are going to have to be filled. So I think that's an important way that we can make a difference.
Okay. Mr. Hayler, obviously you've made written submissions as well, but just for the key things, what particular infrastructure concerns around the proposals are there for local authorities to collect food and garden waste separately?
So on food and garden waste in particular, I think the historic issue has all been around the lack of certainty around the feedstock. So the AD industry has not been able to make those bankable investments because they haven't been sure of where their feedstock is going to come from. Once those collections are introduced and are made mandatory, then that will really help make much stronger investable propositions for anaerobic digestion.
Okay. And Ms. Jacobs, what infrastructure challenges do you think there are in terms of how these vary by geography, particularly between rural and urban areas in terms of our recycling?
Yeah, there's different requirements between the two. I mean, if you look at garden waste and food waste, then the collection frequency is going to vary. Typically in rural areas, they have larger gardens, they do a lot of home composting, both of their food and also of their garden waste. So potentially there's an opportunity to collect less frequently. In urban environments, clearly not all houses have gardens, so that's going to be, and you've got high-rise apartments. So there's different frequencies. I think the important thing is that everybody has the opportunity where they need to. And we spoke earlier about Milan as an exemplar for food waste collections in a built environment, where you have the opportunity to recycle food waste in a public space. So that should be looked at more closely as an opportunity to do the right thing.
Okay. Mr. Courtois, given your own experience within Veolia, and given that the likes of Somerset Waste Partnership have highlighted some concerns with regards to the extra infrastructure challenges for rural areas, can you please elaborate a bit further in terms of what challenges you faced geographically between rural and urban areas?
Sure. So I think in terms of what you have in terms of collections, for example, is obviously if you're in a rural area, it's a much wider spread, so you've got more distance in terms of travel, and so it's very important that you have to basically what you have to do is you have to work according to the proximity principle. So the idea is that waste travels less far, and that's good for carbon, and it makes the whole system more cost effective. So therefore what you have to do is you have to make sure that the system is designed, if it's for food waste or garden waste, you've got to make sure that there's the relevant infrastructure in place in order that it can be collected and treated relatively close together. And that's the key element in a rural area, I think.
Okay, thank you, Jim.